Welcome back to HSC Business Studies. This is the second video in the series looking at exam technique, tips and traps for business studies. Video 1, which you may have had a look at, looks at exam structure, how to perform business in the business exam, study methods, revision, resources, etc. This video, video 2, will concentrate on exam technique and break down the different components of the exam, looking at paragraph writing and sample answers. So you can see in the multiple choice, we'll have to look at some techniques around preparing and typical type questions. We'll look at short answer samples and sample answers and how to tackle those questions. Look at the last couple of years' business studies reports and how to address those and break the question down. And the same with the extended response, looking at a table format of past questions and what they've asked on the different topics. Planning and reading time. So during the 5 minutes reading time in the exam, you're not allowed to write in that time, but the suggestion is that you start backwards by looking at section 3 and section 4 first. So the idea would be to go to section 3, have a look at the business report, read the report carefully, look at the questions they're asking you in the report. Then in section 4, look at the extended response questions, and there's 2 of them where you have to make a choice of one of those 2 and have a pretty good idea then and there of what question you will answer in the exam. If you have time remaining, you should then look through the short answer questions and then the multiple choice questions. So when the exam starts, that first 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how much time you want to spend, but you should be planning your responses to the report and to the case study question. You would be given an exam booklet and booklets to answer those questions in, and there's nothing wrong with using the first page or the inside page as a planning page. Identify it as a planning page. Put your ideas down that you're thinking of in that first 5 minutes of the exam. Once you've done that, you should then proceed to work through the paper from the multiple choice questions onwards. The idea is you've already seen the questions, seen the report, have an idea of what the question's on. So as you're doing the multiple choice and the short answer section of the paper, you're sort of mulling over the ideas that might come up to help you answer those questions, and you can just go to your planning page and jot those down and just keep proceeding with the exam. So the idea is that you're thinking about that in the back of your mind while you're doing the paper, and that might help you with some planning ideas. Let's have a look at some multiple choice questions and to how do we tackle this part of the exam. So typically, there's roughly 5 multiple choice questions from each topic. There's 4 topics, so obviously there's a selection of questions from each of the topics. Multiple choice questions typically look at key terms and concepts and testing of those. One of the techniques that are used is to try to cover the answers, read the question, have an idea of what the answer might be first, before you start looking at the answer. Sometimes students rush reading the question and go straight to the answers. So the idea would be read question carefully, have an idea of what the answer could be from your knowledge, and then proceed to answer the questions or look at the answers. Read all parts of the question carefully, read the stimulus carefully, and identify the key words in the question. And there may be some formulas in that are used. One of the other methods that students use is when answering the question, once they've answered the question on the answer sheet, that on the actual exam paper, they might make a mark next to some of the questions that they might not have been sure on, so that if there's any time remaining at the end of the exam to come back and to do those questions or to look at those questions again. Question 1 from the 2012 HSC exam. Typically the first couple of questions are sort of leading questions, tend to be relatively easier than other questions as a means of sort of settling you into the paper. So looking at this question here, we've got an accountant decides to use the services of a cleaning company for 1 day a week. What is this an example of? So we've got 4 key terms here, and looking at each of the terms, we should know what they mean. Development, downsizing, reducing costs, employing people from overseas, and outsourcing seems to be the standout answer there as a means of getting someone else to do certain functions or services within the business. Our second question we have here is a typical critical path question. And every so often these questions come up and students often get confused on working this out. And the reason is the definition of critical path. This is a scheduling tool in operations, but basically the definition is it's the minimum number of days needed to complete all tasks and finish a project. So when students hear minimum, they start automatically looking for the least number of days, but in actual fact, it's the most number of days, okay? So the definition is the least or the minimum days to complete all tasks, but the actual calculation means that we're looking at the maximum number of days. Okay, so if we look at this particular diagram here, task A would be done first, and we can either go towards the top of the diagram or the bottom of the diagram. Okay, so the idea is that we'd add up the number of days, and it's going to be the highest number of days. It's going to be that particular path. So task A, C, G, then J, and that adds up to 5, that's 10, 15, that's 17 days there. So 17 would be the answer there. Now notice the other answers that are given would be typically the other paths that could be taken. So again, it's the calculation is we're looking for a maximum days, but the definition is the minimum days. And the idea here is that we can't go, so if we went along this way, B, D to H, we can't proceed any further until task G is done. That's what it means. So C and E and D and H, they can be done simultaneously, and that's the benefit of this graph in scheduling. Okay, we've got another question here, or 2 questions from another year in the HSC. This one's a little bit simpler in terms of the layout, but it's a double question. We've got 14 and 15. So again, from our definition, we're looking for the days or the highest number of days from whichever path we take. So I'm looking here, we start with 5, that's 4, that's 6. I'm thinking we're probably, and that's 2, so we're probably going to go this way. And then we go 5 and then 2. So we've got 5, 6 is 11, and 6, that's 16. And then we've got the 2, which is the 18 days. If we add up the others, 18 would be the highest number or the minimum time needed to complete all tasks. So C would be the answer there. In our next question, but it says if activity EC, so there's EC there, if that was delayed and takes 6 days, okay, so what that would mean is that up here, instead of that being 3, we're going to add 6 there. So it says how long will the project be delayed, okay? So the idea of delay means, well, we're going to see how many days that compared to this particular answer here. So if we add these up, we've got 5, we've got 4, that's 9. Now we've got 6, which is 15, and that's 2. So that's making 17 days, okay? So when we're comparing it to the 18 days from the normal path or from the previous question without the delay, then we can see here that there's really no delay. So if it took us 18 days normally, and now with this delay, it still takes us 17, we still haven't reached the 18. It's a little bit of a trick question there in that one. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so sometimes the questions will be asking us for specific content or key words and terminology. Question 4 here, what does the expense ratio measure? So when you're looking at the expense, there's two ratios that cover the efficiency of the business. And I guess you should know that as soon as you hear the word expense, that's an efficiency ratio there. Okay, so each of the different ratios would measure different things. So for example, the net profit ratio would be a profitability. The debt to equity ratio or solvency ratio would be measuring solvency. Let's have a look at question 10. Which of the following would improve the financial position of a business? So sometimes the questions here, they're asking us to compare two lots of answers, but just using a lower, higher term, like in this particular question. So if you want to improve the financial position of a business, would it be better to have a lower or higher current ratio? So the idea would be that a current ratio measures liquidity. 2-to-1 would be an ideal amount. So the lower the current ratio, maybe the inability to meet short-term obligations. So here we would say it's probably higher. So that would knock out A and D. So this is the idea of getting rid of questions or answers that are wrong, so that we're restricting the leftover answers, so we're making a better educated guess, and the probability of getting it right would be a bit higher. So the idea here is it's a higher, we'd knock out C, my apologies there. So D and B would still be part of the answer. So the next part is, would we want a lower accounts receivable turnover ratio or a higher accounts receivable turnover ratio? So the account receivable turnover ratio is the ability to turn over your debt or have customers who buy on credit to pay those bills. So the idea is that that the lower the ratio, okay, in terms of the number of times a year that you collect it, the better it would be. So when you work out that ratio, it gives you an answer of 10, 12, 15 times, and that gets converted into days by dividing 365 into the answer. Okay, so in looking at that there, we would want a lower. So D is wrong, and then B would be our answer there. All right, let's move on. Next question, 2014 HSC. A business is planning to increase its market share by merging with a competitor. So market share tells us something about what the answer might be, and merging. So what financial objective would best illustrate this? So looking at it all together, there's no mention of debt there. Okay, so D would be crossed out there. There's no mention of debt, so D's gone. In terms of liquidity, we know that that's a short-term, current assets, current liabilities. There's no mention of that there, so that would go. So it leaves us A and C. In terms of, is it growth or profitability? The market share, I mean, that's just sales, looking at percentage sales in the market, but the idea of merging means you're getting larger, so A would be the best answer there. So notice the process of elimination that I went through in doing that. Sometimes multiple choice questions have the financial calculations, and in the last few years, NESA has decided to give students the formula. So you don't get a formula sheet per se, but if they're asking you to do a ratio calculation, then what they typically give you is something like that, a formula in brackets next to what they're asking you to do. However, just be careful, because there's other calculations, non-ratio calculations, which you would be required to know that they don't give you the formula. So in order to do the net profit ratio, we need net profit. Now we look at the table, so just be careful. We've got 14 and 15, okay, and this is an extract. So we can't see net profit there. So obviously we have to use the data that's there to calculate the net profit, okay? Now to do that, then you should know what the formula is. So the formula here is gross profit minus expenses, and that's one that's not given, okay? Okay, so it's a not given formula. So from here, make sure we're looking at the right year, 2014. So we look at 2014, gross profit's 50,000, expenses at 20,000. That gives us the 30,000 net profit figure. Now we can put it into the formula. So the net profit divided by sales is the 30,000 from the answer there, divided by the 160 in sales, and then putting that as a percentage gives us 20%. So again, there's some formulas that are non-ratios that you might need to know, okay? Let's move on to the 2017 exam, question 6. So some questions have a stimulus attached to them, and with that stimulus, you obviously have to read that carefully to ascertain the answer. A sole trader, one owner of a business, invests $500,000 into her business. What is this an example of? So again, if we look at this process of elimination first, okay, so if we say, we can go through the answers here. Is it an overdraft? No, an overdraft is a loan. There's no borrowing. We've got investing. Okay, retained profits is a type of internal finance. Our next two, we've got internal debt finance and internal equity. So I guess the debt component is what's wrong. So we're left with B and D there. Now, retained profits, it doesn't say anything about money that's been made in the business previously. It says puts in her into her business. So she's putting the money in herself. So that would knock out retained profits, and that would be an internal equity source of finance. Looking at our next question, question 10. So we've got a visual here. We've got salty sunscreen for teenagers, and we've got it for adults there. We've got a price of $15 for teenagers and $10 for adults. So the question is, they've got the same ingredients. Basically, it's the same product. This is an example of which of the following. Okay, so again, this is a question where we can't sort of know the answer first. We've got to look through the selections before we can make a decision. All right, price leading, okay, not a syllabus term. So that's probably not going to be correct. We've got price skimming. Now, if you know the definition of skimming, skimming is, setting a higher price of what the market can bear. But because we've got two different products, it's not going to be skimming, although some students might have got confused on that, saying it's a higher price for teenagers than adults. Penetration is a low price. Okay, so again, this notion that there's two different prices. But, when you look at the consumer law section of marketing, you will realise that it's price discrimination. And the definition basically is charging different prices for the same product to different groups. All right, let's move on. I'll just clear the screen. Okay, so our next question, knowing the syllabus is probably an important part of your preparation. It is a very important part. So sometimes when we get questions like this, where it's asking us a question that's directly comes from the syllabus. So the question is on transformed resources. That's part of the operations topic. And when I've got it here, this is the syllabus extract. Under inputs, we've got transformed and transforming, and transformed resources are materials, information, customers. Customers, information, materials. So knowing that syllabus and the techniques, if you looked at in video 1 about memorizing the syllabus with the closed passage, etc., well, then that's an easy mark there. Okay, let's have a look at section 2, our short answer type questions. All right, so in section 2, basically, again, the questions in the short answers can come from any of the 4 topics. This time, in this section, we would need to take particular account of the verb that's used, the glossary verb, and we've mentioned that in video 1, and breaking down those verbs and what to do with those verbs. So we need to give more effort and analysis to questions with higher marks. That's just a given. Be concise in your writing whilst using stimulus material and examples. Often get that from students asking, oh, do I use my Qantas case study? Do I use my IKEA case study in short answers? And the answer to that is yes. If it warrants and it's going to help you answer the question, definitely. And obviously, key terminology and concepts is an important part of this section as well. All right, so I've got a sample question here, and this comes from the NESA workbooks that are produced most years. So we've got our stimulus material here. Sue is a sole trader whose business is growing rapidly as sales are increasing. As a result of the growth, she needs to purchase stock worth $10,000. We look at the question, explain a potential conflict between short-term and long-term financial objective for Sue. So we know that this particular question comes from the finance topic, it comes from under the role, and part of looking at the role and looking at the objectives was this short and long-term conflict that can occur. So let's have a look at the way the students answered the question. We've got our explain question first of all. So we know that explain means looking at the cause and effect, okay? So we would circle the verb and we'd make sure that we're talking about conflict, so key word, and we've got short and long-term obligations there in terms of objectives. So let's have a look at the answer. A potential conflict between a short-term and long-term financial objective would be balancing liquidity and long-term growth. Straight away, we've attacked the question. So what's the conflict they've identified? That there's a problem with liquidity in the short term and growth in the long term. This can be seen by how Sue may attempt to lower her current liabilities in order to increase and improve her liquidity. However, in doing so, Sue limits her business. So here's the conflict, limits her business for potential investment opportunities, which may limit the business's ability to, and I'll just move that out of the way, to achieve long-term growth. 3-mark question. In terms of the answer, could we talk about the stock and the 10,000? Yes. Do we have to? Not in this way. The way this person has answered the question is that they've identified the short and long-term objectives and they've identified the conflict. So basically, by achieving one, we are foregoing the other, and that's been identified in the answer. And again, any of these questions I go through in the video, you're quite welcome to stop the video and have a look back at those at any stage. Pause the video to help you there. All right, our next question, and I apologise for, might be a little bit difficult to read. In this particular question, question 22, a business develops video games. It had 3 different games for sale last year. The table shows forecast and actual sales for each game. So we've got game A, B, C. We've got forecasted, so that's what we were hoping to achieve, and the actual results there. Now, notice the verb in the first question, why? Why is this information? So why means give us reasons that this is an important part of the marketing process. So if you know the marketing process, that's our SMEDI word that we looked at in the previous video, so knowing the content, then this information, it's financial information, which is in the last section of the marketing plan, would help us to make future decisions. So this information is important because it allows the business to monitor its performance, comparing comparing the forecasted values with actual performance. This allows the business to control taking corrective action by revising its marketing strategies. Pretty good answer, very good answer, in fact, because it picks up on this table here is about comparing planned results or forecasted results with actual performance. That is mentioned in the syllabus under the marketing plan or marketing processes. And all they've done is saying why. And the why is it allows us to take corrective action and revise the marketing strategy. Let's look at the second part of the question. With reference to the information, recommend a strategy for promoting Game B. So our verb here is recommend. So again, why recommend? Pretty similar. Give reasons for using this particular strategy. Okay, so when we look at this particular question, and I'll just move this out of the way. All right, so the strategy we need to identify. Now, one of the tips in the short answer questions is just don't sort of waffle around the question. Get straight in and answer the question. So straight away, advertisements, underline. There we go. There's our strategy. Okay. Notice how they've answered this. Advertisements are paid non-personal messages promoted through a medium and are very effective in promoting Game B. So not only have we got the strategy, we've incorporated a definition of the strategy, and we've also given a recommended or saying why it's effective for Game B. Really good start to the answer. This is because it increases awareness. So now we're giving reasons why we're recommending it. This is because it increases awareness about the product, providing information about its features and advantages. This would allow the business to differentiate Game B and thus stimulate demand. All right, so again, if we're looking at Game B and we look up the top here, that we can see that the forecasted results and the actual results, there's something gone wrong there, okay, as opposed to Game A and B. So the business, therefore, could advertise through social media, so that's an advertisement, game magazines. This would allow the business to reach its forecasted amount of 200,000. So with reference to the information, we've used the 200,000, so we've used the data, and we've also addressed the verb of recommend, and we've given a strategy, and we've given some reasons around that. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Let's have a look at another question here. And again, sample answers from the Nessa book, showing us what a typical answer to this question looks like. So we've got Heather owns a financial planning business with offices in 4 countries, including Australia. Heather outsources the cleaning of her Sydney office. Explain one advantage of this strategy. So again, our stimulus, financial planning in 4 countries, that tells us it's global, including Australia, and she's outsourcing the cleaning of her office. Explain one advantage of this strategy. So we're looking at the strategy of outsourcing, okay? Again, major part in topic 1, operations, outsourcing. The syllabus actually requires you to know the advantages and disadvantages, questions coming straight from there. By outsourcing this job, Heather's business is able to focus on the core function of financial planning, which will allow the business to save money on costs. Otherwise, she would have spent the time cleaning of the office. So what's one advantage of outsourcing is that it allows the owners to focus on other core business functions. 2 marks there. Next part of the question, she also outsources her financial record keeping. Explain 2 disadvantages. So here's an advantage of outsourcing, and here we need 2 disadvantages of outsourcing the record keeping. Now, again, you should be thinking, what have I learnt from outsourcing disadvantages in general to apply to this particular question? It says, by outsourcing her financial record keeping, Heather runs the risk of being unable to personally monitor the practices of recording the data. This may be disadvantageous as the business can have their financial reports being overestimated in value, which may be an unethical practice. So pretty good reason there. Also, Heather may also run the risk of having her information leaked to competitors, thus losing confidentiality and a competitive advantage. So pretty good. They've crafted out of the one sort of misuse of the information because you're removed yourself from doing that particular task, and it's given those two advantages and the cause and effect of it. So the effect of it meaning that it's unethical, the effect of it losing your competitive advantage. Next question. How might a business benefit when an operations manager acts in an ethically and socially responsible manner? So support your answer with relevant examples. So this time the verb in the question is how. Okay, so how might it benefit? So we're giving reasons. Now this socially and ethically, this concept of CSR is a pretty important concept in topic 1 that you should know well. So let's have a look at the answer. A business might benefit from this because it creates a positive perception of the branding of the business. So just straight into it, there's the answer. The benefit is a positive perception. The business's positioning of its products will be seen in a positive light, and this will lead to consumers' word of mouth advertising. So again, positive perception, they're built on that positive light, this whole word of mouth advertising. Increase awareness of the business's product and its positive image and branding can potentially increase sales and hence profitability. Very, very well worded answer, direct, giving lots of reasons of how it benefits. And then we've got an example there of Qantas and its donations to charity each financial year. So very good structure to look at in terms of answering a question like that. Next question, explain the interdependence of finance and operations in a business. So you would know that interdependence is covered in all 4 topics. It's a major part of the course, and you should be, putting some effort into knowing the linkages between each of the topics and being able to explain this. This question comes up quite regularly. It's come up in a report question in the past, and potentially it could even be a case study question. It hasn't been asked yet, but potentially could be. So the way that I teach my students to answer a question like this is it's an explain. So we're looking at the cause and the effect, but we're also looking at the linkages between them. So let's have a look at this answer. It says finance allocate the budget for operations processes to ensure they have adequate funding for inputs, transformation processes to make the output. So what can we learn from this answer here is we don't just say, well, finance gives money to operations to make the product. That's the simple answer. What we've done is we've sophisticated the answer by putting there allocating a budget. So instead of saying money, we've got budget. And instead of saying to make the product, which is the output at the end, we've actually, mentioned aspects of operations processes and inputs, etc., to make the product. So much better. Finance, for example, will give operations funds to purchase inputs and pay for equipment or labour needed to produce outputs. Operations uses these funds to determine the quality capable with the available funds. Example, high funds means high quality valued products. Operations, implementation of quality and cost controls will create more funds through sales that finance uses to allocate new or change existing budgets. Now, the reason why I like this answer is, one, it's specific. So we've got specific parts of operations and marketing, operations and finance in terms of the budget and the processes. But I like how it comes back. So not only have we said that finance gives money to operations to make the product. If operations make a quality product and use these cost controls, they will generate more funds for the business. So that's money coming back to finance to use in other areas of the business. Very good answer. Next, we've got in our short answers, potential calculations. Now, looking at this question from this particular HSC year, and that is, we don't actually have a question asking to calculate, but we've got a question asking to discuss the gearing of Andrew's Discount Tyres. And it's 5 marks. So in order to answer this particular question in terms of the gearing, well, we would need to be able to calculate the gearing. So the question's asking us to look at the advantages and or disadvantages of gearing. So one, we've actually got to work out the gearing. Now we look in here, we've got industry average gearing ratio. So we've got our formula at 80%, okay? And we've got an extract here and it looks like a balance sheet with our assets and liabilities. Okay, so the first thing you need to do in this question is calculate the level of gearing. Now, if we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages, we have to determine, is the gearing high or is the gearing low before we can make comments about that. Okay, so using our formula of total liabilities divided by the total equity, so we'd need to add up our liabilities here. Okay, and then so that's 2, 1 and 5, so we've got $8,000 there, and divided by 16, so you know, looking at that there, that's 50%. We've worked out that as 50%, and we'll see that in the sample answer on the next page. Okay, so just keep this in mind. We've got our table, we need to do our calculation first, and then we've got 80%. So normally questions in business might give you an idea that the business is struggling in a particular area, so there's a problem and we need to fix that problem. But when we look at 50% gearing, then we're thinking the industry average is 80. Well, that's probably not too bad compared to the industry average. So let's have a look. Here's a sample answer for the question. Okay, so first of all, we've got a definition. So we can see down here in orange that how we've broken the question down. Okay, so we've got a definition, we have to use the data, the stimulus, we've got to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, and that's addressing the verb. So we did a bit of work about what you write, the content, so that's around gearing and solvency and how you write it in the verb. So let's look at the question, the answer here. So we've defined gearing as the relationship between debt and equity. The gearing of Andrew's Discount Tyres is 50%. So that's what we calculated previously. So we've got that. This can be compared to the industry average of 80%. Short, sharp, clear answers in terms of sentences here. Andrew's Discount Tyres gearing of 50% indicates that the business is in a sound and safe financial position. So there's an advantage there. Okay. So it's in a sound, safe position. And the advantages of this is that it would be low risk and hence would have low debt repayments. So there's the advantages of identifying that the gearing is low. Okay, this would lead to a lower risk of business failure. So we've got another reason or another advantage there. Then in this particular answer, the student has then said a disadvantage of low gearing could be that the business may be missing out on using more debt than equity, which would or could lead to greater potential for profit. So do you need to do both advantages and disadvantages? No, but it shows it as a better answer, doesn't it? Because pretty cluey concept here that low levels of gearing, although safe and less risk, it could mean that the business should be or could potentially make more profit by borrowing more money and investing that in the business. So another good answer there. And again, any of these answers, you can go back at any time and look at those. All right, let's have a look at our next question. Okay, so, sorry about that, just jumped ahead in our clicks. All right, so our next question here is to justify the method of payment that would be most effective in reducing the business's financial risk. So I try to select different questions with different verbs just to show you how to tackle those questions. So this is a justify. So justify the method of payment. So when we're breaking down this particular question here, what we need to do obviously is to address the verb, which is to justify, but the content, the learn about is the method of payment that's most effective in reducing financial risk. And that's 5 marks. So students in this particular year perform pretty poorly in this question because it's on looking at methods of payments, you know, the last section of financial strategies, which students find the most difficult part of the entire course. So let's have a look at it. The method of payment with the lowest risk for the importer is clean payment. So we're just answering the question straight away. Lowest risk, clean payment. With this method, the goods will be shipped and received before the importer pays for them, which reduces risk. So there we go. Definition means that the goods will be shipped and received before the importer pays for them, which reduces the risk. Okay. The risk to the importer is minimized as it allows them to inspect the goods for quality and quantity prior to payment. While this method requires the exporter to trust the importer, it is an effective method to reduce the business's risk. So we could have a number of different answers to this question, but the way that this has been answered, there's justification. And the justification is around here about there's obviously less risk and being able to inspect the quality and the quantity of the goods before the payment is released. This next question here, the reason why I've taken this out is just to show you some of the marking criteria that teachers use when they're marking your HSC exam. So again, we've got a stimulus material here that we need to read carefully, and then the question follows. A large business repairs trucks that transport heavy loads. The business struggles to complete many different types of repairs in an efficient manner. It has had difficulty meeting legal regulations and customer expectations. So our question is to describe 2 transformation processes that might apply to this particular business here. Now it's a lower order verb in describe, and we look down to our criteria, provides characteristics and features of 2 transformation processes. So all we need is features and characteristics there. So critical path analysis is a sequencing and scheduling tool that the business could use. So transformation process, operations syllabus, this person has identified this aspect of it. For instance, the repairs could be analysed so that it was known which parts of the processes could be completed at the same time. So there's an advantage, if you like, or a feature, thus reducing the overall repair time. So there's our 1 transformation process. What features? It's a sequencing and scheduling tool, and a little bit of feature is that we can perform tasks simultaneously. Our second one, process layout, is placing the processes in a logical order of repair. So there we go, definition. This would help speed up the process by setting out equipment and materials in the most efficient way, therefore reducing costs. So you can see in that answer there, this particular student has done a little bit more than describe, and then accessing the full range of marks there. All right. Let's move on. All right, so we move on to the business report now. This is section 3. In section 3 of the paper, we must write a business report. So we've got there, we must. Now, again, students in the past, what's a business report? How do I write a business report, etc.? And these are some, an important area that at school your teacher should be going in and you should be practicing this. The business report has a stimulus, typically has problems or experiencing problems, and then obviously the clues regarding the cause of the problem and solutions would be identified in the stimulus. Use the question to make the headings used in the report, and we'll have a bit of a look at that. So that's pretty important. Now, do you have to follow a specific format? No, you don't. I know out there sometimes it might be conveyed that we have to have certain headings, and in those headings we have to do certain things. No, the only thing you need to do is to have headings and subheadings, etc. But you need to address the question and make it look like it's a report. In the last few years of HSC marking, again, it hasn't been a major issue, but still some students are failing to write in a business report format, and that really is limiting their marks in accessing the B and the A range. All right, so what should a typical report style look at? I always say to students, the first heading you should put is executive summary. As soon as you put the word executive summary, this is an indication you understand what a report is. It's usually the first heading, and we're away with our report style writing. Okay, you can see here we constantly use the business name, whatever's given. So in the past, they tend to select businesses that that HSC students would have a bit of an idea around. So we've had pizza, we've had juice, we've had mobile phone companies, etc. And you just need to keep using the business name. Again, it's a little trick as to show that you referring to the stimulus. Okay. This report outlines and evaluates. So in our executive summary, we're basically looking at what some of the issues that are accounted, identifying the business, and then we're using the question. So the question to have sentences around the question. So one sentence for each part of the question to identify, how you're going to answer that question. Then we come to the main part of our answer, and we've got headings. Okay, so we must use headings. So for example, in this particular question here, outline the role of financial management. We would make that question into a heading. So our heading would simply be the role of financial management. Now, there's no real right or wrong headings here. The only thing is that it needs to basically align with the question. In terms of report and subheadings, we could then go A, financial objectives, and then 1, and look at solvency as an objective. So we've got the main heading, the role of financial management, we've got objectives, and then we've got examples. So this sort of layering in report format is, it's just a good way to set out your report. Now, can we have something at the end? Yes, we have a summary, conclusion, whatever you want to call it, recommendation sometimes students write. And again, it's just to tie up your answer. So remember, every piece of writing that in terms of extended response writing, even reports, etc., it has a beginning, has an introduction, it has middle or a body, and it has some sort of conclusion. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through, look at a couple of years HSC questions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but just to give you some tips, etc. So this was last year's HSC question 25. So we've got a business, Ruse Outback Eatery, Pty Ltd, so it's a private company, is opening an additional restaurant in New South Wales. They plan to position the restaurant as an exclusive restaurant specialising in modern Australian food with quality customer service. The owner requires assistance with the following. So we've got there something about the business and what their sort of aim or plan is, and then we've got some dot points around acquisition and development of staff, raising some additional funds for the day-to-day running of the business, and the monitoring of working capital. So this is going to give us an idea as to what types of answers we're going to use and the questions that come from there. Now, the interesting thing about this question in 2019 was there's only 2 bullet point questions. In previous years, there's 3. Now, what you must know in the report is that this question here will cover 2 topics only. So the first thing I'm saying to you is to read the question. So this first question asking us to discuss the methods of acquisition and development of staff. This is the HR topic, okay? So this is a HR question, and the second question is a finance question. So what that tells us is that in the next section of the paper, HR and finance will not be tested. It will be marketing and operations. Okay, so that's you got to know that, so you can anticipate which topics are being tested. So the 2 bullet points sort of restricted students in how much they can write. And again, the HSC exam questions seem to be getting students to write less or to limit what they can write. So you really do need to show your understanding in a bit more detail. So instead of saying recommend strategies, and you could do 2, 3, 4, etc., where the NESA is limiting that so that they're trying to get a better quality answer. All right, so discuss means advantages and disadvantages. So what it would be, so we'd need to talk about acquisition and development, what they entail, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of that, whilst trying to incorporate the stimulus material. So as an exclusive restaurant specialising in Australian food, we're probably going to acquire staff with some expertise and skill in that area. So that would be something that you might pick up in your planning. And then 2 appropriate working capital strategies, and looking at those from the syllabus. We've got the leasing and the sale and lease back, and then how we would put that into there. All right, let's move on. So that's the 2019 question. All right. Okay, so we've just jumped ahead a bit. Sorry about that. So the 2018 question. So stimulus material is around Fast Burgers Ltd. So that's a public company. And again, we've got some pretty detailed information about the business and some of the issues surrounding that business. So I've just identified here, use the stimulus, highlight, underline aspects of it, use the questions as headings for your report. So what would be our headings in our report after our executive summary would be to describe the role of operations management. So that could just simply be the role of operations management. The second one, demonstrate why CSR should remain a key concern. Okay, so a bit of a longer question, but we could just simply have corporate social responsibility, something along those lines. And then we've got recommend 3 HR strategies. So that could just simply be human resource strategies. Okay, they could maintain its record as an excellent employer. Now you can see down the bottom there in the orange is the last part of the question. Recommend means give reasons, and if, for example, we were to use rewards, then the reasons around that would be to motivate staff that drive for success in the business, and then that leads to greater output, efficiency, etc. So one of the things I'm big on for answers is we're building those linkages and we're building those implications, if you like. So we're recommending rewards because it motivates and drives staff to success. Great. But then what happens then? So this is the in-depth look at the answer. So you're recommending because it does this success, and that success leads to output, greater output, efficiency, less cost, more profit. So that would be, the detail in your answer there. All right, 2017 exam. Now, the reason why I took this question out as well is to show you that sometimes you're given financial data in the stimulus. And this particular year, students struggled in terms of knowing how to use the sales and the profit levels. Yes, we've got some stimulus material here for Sporty Goods Limited, and we've got that it's facing increased competition and they're concerned about the positioning. So there's some of the issues around the business. Okay, so again, must use stimulus. We're using the questions down here as headings. So in this particular report, the first question is to outline the strategic role of financial management. So notice there that 2 years in a row that it's around this strategic role, different topics. So when we look at this particular question, this is a financial topic question. We're looking for another topic. So recommend 2 strategies to improve financial performance. So that would be another financial question or financial part. And then the last part is on marketing, about the importance of monitoring and controlling the business's marketing strategy. So again, we would use the headings to develop use the questions to develop our headings. And then the verb is obviously a focus there. So when we're outlining one strategic role in the syllabus, strategic role, we've got interdependence, we've got the objectives, and we've got, the strategic role itself, that long-term financial planning and using the resources of the business. Okay, so this would indicate to us that that's probably a smaller treatment than the other 2 sections because of the verb. So outlining and giving the features and characteristics, and then the recommending the 2 strategies. So we'd have to do more with the recommend, and those financial strategies would need to match up here with the stimulus material. So obviously we're looking here, profits have been falling and sales have been falling. So we'd probably look at strategies for profitability, and they could be things like revenue controls or cost controls, and looking at those. The last part's interesting, about the importance of monitoring and controlling the marketing strategy. And again, specific part of the syllabus. That's the last part of processes. And what we know from the syllabus there is comparing the planned results with actual results and revising the marketing strategy itself. So we'd need to talk about that in that particular part of our answer. All right, so hopefully that's sort of broken down that question for you. 2016, majority of our stimulus material is in the form of a financial report. So we've got Lee's Catering, the small business, high profile chef, food is excellent quality, it has many bookings for future events. So we've got a little bit of material here, and then we've got this financial data. So a little bit different. In terms of the question, it says a potential new partner is concerned about the accuracy of the financial reports and the effectiveness of current management. So we've got a little bit more in terms of what they perceive some of the problems might be. So you're asked to write a report that explains the possible limitations of the financial reports. So it's an area of the syllabus, limitations, financial reports. They're things like valuing assets, normalized earnings, timing issues, etc. And that particularly you'd need to look at the possible limitations of that. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky area of the syllabus that students get confused on because it's quite technical around the finance part of it. But it's basically saying that when financial reports are produced like this one, it's an extract, we don't get the full financial picture. And sometimes that's an advantage for the business if they're trying to lure in investors. Other times it's a disadvantage because it doesn't show the true, figures and how the business is going. Our second part of the question is recommend appropriate working capital strategies. Okay, so we've got our working capital strategies. So, looking at those strategies around sale and lease back and leasing. You could even look at control of current assets, control of current liabilities, and within those. The last part of the question is asking us to evaluate pricing strategy. Okay, so we've gone explain, probably mid-order verb, recommend, getting a bit high, and then, at the top of the ordered verbs there, evaluate, making judgments around a suitable pricing strategy. Okay, so we'd need to be looking at current. So we've got liquidity problems here. We've got gross profit being lower than industry average. We've got a very high expense ratio. Okay, so that would be stimulus that we'd need to refer to. All right, let's move on. What I've got here is a sample, a part sample of an answer, just to show you how to set the report. So we've got business report on Lee's Catering for potential partner. So they've picked up on the stimulus in terms of the heading there, and it's by a business consultant. Now, some students make up names, etc., but that's fine. So the executive summary is our first heading, and I'm not going to read through it, but basically the executive summary will look at the issues or concerns in the business and then address different parts of the question. Our first heading, notice the numbering. Number 1, limitations of financial reports. There are various limitations of financial reports, and then it lists them: capitalised expenses, valuing assets, etc. So just to show you what a report looks like. Then when we're breaking that down, so we're going 1.1, looking at capitalised expenses. Okay, so then they're looking at that. And when you, later on, you might like to stop and have a look at and read the answer, it's basically looking at the cause and effect, like what is the limitation of a capitalised expense on the business. Then we've got our second part of the question, which is working capital management as a heading. And this is what I like, and I would suggest to you as well. So we put the heading, and then we have a lead-in, like some lead-in sentences around what we're writing about working capital. And then we identify the specific aspect of it. So 1.1, control of current assets. So we've got a lead-in, and then we've got our first heading down the bottom here, and then we would start addressing the question. So we're looking for recommend type references. And then our final part is price points as a pricing strategy. Now you can put pricing strategy, whatever the heading you like, but they're using 3 price points. And again, it's not the whole answer. I've just taken extracts of the answer there. So that just shows you how to write a report and what it looks like. All right, in 2015, we've got fit, fast bikes, and again, some stimulus and our questions around here. So I've just put that in at a later date. So you've got all the questions together, and you might like to have a look at that and look at the sample answers or the suggested marking guidelines, etc. In that particular question in 2015, I've just picked up, so you probably, from what I've done so far, identified that it has to be report format. We've got to look at each part of the question. We've got to use the terminology. We have to address the verb. It's got to be cohesive, logical, well written. Okay. 2014, this particular year, we've got a higher order verb. We go recommend, then discuss, then explain. So really don't take for granted that that first bullet point question is an outline or describe lower order. So this really dictates the quantity and the quality of your answer. So just be very aware of that. That's going to direct you to how much you write. Now, remember, overall, we're writing about 800 words. So, if we divide it evenly, which we usually don't, but if you divide it evenly, it's around 300 words each section. But higher order verbs need more treatment. And again, you can look at that question later. One of the things that NESA produces is it gives overall advice on how students answer the question. And this is on the NESA site underneath the exam paper for each year. So in this particular question, candidates showed strength in using the stimulus, explaining an appropriate financial option. Okay, so appropriate meaning it's relevant to the stimulus, comparing a variety of issues associated with both outsourcing and the factory expansion and the relationship. So there's some really strong analysis in there, and it has the report features. Okay, so this is a general feedback. So what do students need to improve on? students were pretty lost when it come to global factors. Scanning and learning, research and development, etc. Students didn't really know that part of the syllabus well, the last part, very last dot point in operations, and that was a concern. Making reference to the stimulus throughout the response and relating the global factors to how the business operates. So this might give you, and again, you can have a look back at the question and look at, the feedback from the marking centre. 2013 question. Now, 2012 and 13, 12 was the new format for the business studies exam. So 2012 was the first year of the major changes they made, and 2013, obviously the second year. But just wanted to show you this because this 12 and 13, the actual question was in sentence format, not in stem and leaf, okay? STEM type question. All right. So here we're asked to write a report recommending marketing and financial strategies to improve the performance of the business. It's pretty straightforward because it's basically saying, write about a couple of marketing and financial strategies, link it to the stimulus and give reasons for it. But again, just don't be put off by the fact that it's in sentences. So the verb is recommend, the topic is financial management and marketing, and we're looking at strategies there. All right, let's move on to our extended response type questions. So the only difference between the business report and the extended response is that obviously they're going to be questions from different topics, but you have to use the case study. So in section 3, if you don't write in report format, you're obviously going to be restricted in accessing the full range of marks. It's the same with the case study or extended response. No mention, hint of a case study, you're really going to restrict being able to access more than a C range response. Okay, so just make sure that you're using case study. We need to then, if you're looking for high marks, you're going to have to integrate. So it's not just at the end of a sentence, oh yeah, example, Apple does this. That's not really, it mentions a case study, but it's not really an integration of the case study. The case study, you should refer to all the aspects of the syllabus in your preparation. Don't just use general company information. So don't just write about Qantas and when it was founded and etc. We're not really worried about that. We're worried about what aspect of Qantas do you know that's going to help you answer the question. And remember in this section, 2 topics, so 1 question on each topic, and they will be different to what's in the report. So just really must highlight that. You have to use case study and studies. The next part I'll address is students often say, do I use one detailed case study throughout or do I use multiple case studies? And the answer to that is you can do either. However, in recent years, students have been using multiple studies and changing the case studies in the answer, and it seems to give them a greater depth of understanding. So it's not like you're going to get marked down for only using 1 or 2 or 3, but definitely consider using multiple case studies. Okay. We haven't done much work on the rubric. Now, the rubric is those sentences with bullet points above where the question lies. And we'll have a look at that a little bit later, but these are what you're going to be assessed on. So knowledge relevant to the case study. So terminology, concepts, case study, logical, well-structured, answer the question. So if you've been, doing the work and doing the past papers, etc., and you understand the syllabus and you're really studying hard, you should be able to use the terminology, using the case study, and really getting that logical, structured response. Okay. This is the 2019 questions, and question 26 and 27. So obviously you answer one or the other. And we mentioned about in the planning time where you should look at the questions, review the questions and say, I think I'm going to go with 26 and start planning that sort of answer in your head. They're both analyse questions, so pretty high order verb, drawing out and relating the implications of or the relationship between market segmentation and the marketing strategies. Okay, so this question is asking you to talk about segmentation and then what's the relationship with the marketing strategies there. Okay, so if you look at an example like McDonald's and its Happy Meal, they're segmenting the market, so they're targeting that younger children audience with the toy and with the actual meal. And then in the market, the relationship is then McDonald's can target through its promotion to match up with that target market or that segmented part of the market. Okay. The second question, very similar, except we've got performance objectives and the operation strategies. Okay, so I marked this question last year in the HSC, and again, it's the better students that actually, look down here, better responses that clearly showed the relationship between the 2 points. Now, I know this is on 26 and I'm looking at 27, but again, it's the same feedback. Like, are you able to say what performance objectives are? Okay, so that's your KPIs and your cost and the speed, etc. And then how does your operation strategies, your outsourcing, quality management, etc., how does that relate to those strategies? So it's the relationship. So by doing this or achieving this, all right, you can put in place strategies to help you achieve those objectives. Okay. What else do we notice? Integrate the case study throughout. And this is it. This is, I guess, the major part. Draw out an implication. Okay. So it's not only just making the link between the two, but it's going that extra part and really going in depth and drawing out that relationship through good examples and case study, etc. Okay. So what did students need to improve on? And it's the reverse, isn't it? Drawing out the relationship, using the terminology and having a clear understanding. So, you know, students who did not know what segmentation was and able to define it, well, you're really struggling to get any decent marks in this question. If you're a student that just maybe knew what segmentation is and give an example, talked about a couple of strategies, okay, you're probably in that C range, that 9 to 12 range. If you've made no connection, you're not going to get more than 13, okay? So the connection puts you into the 14, 15, 16 range, that B range, and then obviously that drawing out significant implication and case study will put you into that A range. 2018 question. Explain the influence of global markets on financial management of businesses. Or question 27, explain the influence of globalization on the interaction of price and quality. So here, what we have is a finance question. Now, some students got confused when they see global markets, global marketing, they start thinking marketing. It's a finance part. So this part of the syllabus that you had to write on was around the availability of funds and the global economic outlook and interest rates. If you didn't know it, you're really going to struggle in getting good marks at all in this question, okay? So students tend to get turned off by finance, not sure why. So they go to this question, it's a marketing question, but it's globalization on a specific aspect of marketing, which is price and quality. So speaking to students that did this question, they found it really difficult to get a detailed answer around that one concept, okay? And this one, again, there's 3 syllabus points you can write about to draw out an answer. So, you know, in the scheme of things, quite difficult questions there for your average business studies student. Our better responses down here, again, integrates the case study, demonstrates an understanding of the global influences, so this is 26, and being able to look at the impact on the financial management, okay? Look at the criteria, makes evident, clearly evident the relationship between, so again, that connection, that link, and it's an explain question this year, so it's a lower mid-order verb, that cause and effect, how and the why, but you still have to make a link, case study, and this sustained logical terminology, etc. So really, the only criteria that tends to change from year to year is the connection of the content. So this is always a given, and then it's the connection in the question that they're looking for. All right, so having a look at that particular question, just move on. Okay, so what I might do now is just jump ahead to look at the questions that have been asked in the past. All right, just a bit conscious about the video going too long, but you obviously can re-watch this and stop it and start it, etc. So what I've done is basically taken topic of operations and then listed down all the past HSC questions from 2012 onwards and put the year in brackets after it. So you can see operations has been the most tested in the last section. Now, I'm not sort of saying to you, let's start predicting and guessing what questions and topics they're going to be, but looking at the past questions, we can get an idea of what has been asked and what hasn't been asked, and that sort of helps with our preparation. So we've already been through question 5, that relationship between the performance objectives and the strategies. 2017, analyse the effects of globalization on operations management. Now, this is a good one to point out. When it says operations management, typically it means the strategies. Could it mean the processes? Absolutely. But it's like, how does globalization, breaking down of barriers between countries and allowing greater access to markets, how does that affect operations? So in simple terms, globalization has allowed businesses like, Apple to set up its outsourcing component, Foxconn in China, and that's one effect. And then we look at the implications of economies of scale and producing quality phones and, all around that cost saving, etc. Have a look at this. In question 3 in 2016, what do you notice here? That these two questions, one year after the other, very similar. Evaluate the response of operations management to external influences. So it's an operations question on management strategies to external influence. So globalization is our external influence. Okay. Now, if you've watched video 1 with our mnemonic about only in Greenland they quietly chew gum leaves every Christmas, that's the aspect or the influences on operations that they're looking at there. So is globalization external influence? Yes. The difference between the 2 years, however, is this is evaluating the response. So in other words, here's the influence, external, could be economic, or it could be competitive based, etc. How has operations responded? So what strategies, like a quality management in terms of quality based, etc., response to that. Whereas this year is the effect of globalization. So they're similar. It's almost like globalization has caused the business to respond by doing these particular strategies. If we have a look then across the board, all 5 questions in some capacity are asking for strategies. So it's a given you need to know the strategies in each topic well. Assess the strategies to respond to the influence. Sounds pretty similar to 2016. Evaluate the importance of the strategies for competitive advantage. The responses of management, pretty much strategies to influences. The effect of globalization on management could be processes, but it's easier probably to do strategies. And then obviously this is a strategy on the strategies. Okay, so worth thinking about. Let's move on to marketing. Marketing 2012, 14, 18 and 19 and last year, and we looked at last year's question already and we broke that down. Notice how, and we looked at 2018, so we've got the price, quality and the strategies there. 2014, we've got strategies. So out of those 4 questions that were asked, 3 of them are around strategies, some specific, some in general, and then we've got our ethical and government regulation. So, this is looking at our consumer law, Australian consumer law, the Competition and Consumer Act 2010, and the ethical behaviour, things like truth and accuracy and good taste and engaging in fair competition, etc. So why is that important? So that's looking at things like benefits and costs of that. All right, let's move on. Finance topic, as I said, students sort of don't really like too much case study questions, and there's only been 3 of them. So this is the least tested. Operations has been the most tested, and human resources and marketing are similar in terms of the testing. Let's have a look. 2012, how can different sources of funds help to achieve objectives? So again, it's a how question. Sources of funds, okay, so where the funds come from and how they meet up with the objectives. Evaluate the importance of strategies, improving business performance. So what's business performance? Tends to come up a lot in questions. So performance could be what? Profit, could be sales, competitive advantage, market share. So that's something to consider there. And then explain the influences of global markets on financial management. So again, we looked at that question and we talked about that interest rates, etc., and how that impacts upon the strategies of the business, the financial strategies. Okay, so looking at that, we would probably could, and again, we're not into guessing here, but it's 2012, 15 and 18 has been under tested in the case study. Okay, there's no guarantee that that'll come up this year. All right, and our HR topic, and we look through 13, 14, 16, 17 was the last time. What do we notice about the questions in general? Strategies, responding to the influences, sounds familiar, doesn't it? Causes of disputes and the strategies to resolve them. Interesting part, because the HR topic is broken into sort of that HR and looking after workers, and then that whole dispute section. So you're expected to know a workplace dispute and how it's resolved. And resolving doesn't need to just be the steps like the negotiation, etc. We can obviously use things like rewards, monetary and non-monetary rewards to resolve disputes. In 2016, the response of management. So again, what's human management? Again, probably strategy. So how has HR management responded to these issues? So that's things like, putting in place the processes there around those influences legally in terms of workers' comp and abiding by legislation and the ethical issues there. And then in 2017, again, this response of HR to these specific influences. So again, it's almost like they've doubled down here where they've got 2 very similar questions. Again, the response, evaluate, analyse, pretty high order. This is legal and ethical, but this is economic, technological and social. So looking at the other influences that weren't tested. All right, and I've just left those questions in them. We've already sort of had a bit of a look at those. This is the rubric I was talking about before. A lot of students just ignore it, don't even read it. But, if you've done enough practice and you've studied well and you're well prepared, you should be doing that automatically. And then I've got here, just to finish off, just wanted to show you this because In the last few years, what's happening is that students in section 4 are using report format, and there's nothing wrong with report format. And some teachers are saying that they're teaching report format in both 3 and 4 so students don't forget to do it in section 3. Okay, but it's up to you. And again, it's a preference. Is it easier to answer the question? Sometimes, okay. So you can use the headings and you can read the answer. It's quite a good look at that question and the breakdown of it. And I've got in here some judgment. So things like effectively responded by doing this, okay. We've got our case study, Jetstar, and down here again, allowing Qantas to increase market share whilst decreasing costs, enabling it to achieve a competitive advantage. So we've got reasoning, we've got some judgment here, we've got case study, we've got sophistication in our answer, etc. All right, so that brings us to the end of the video. I know it sort of probably went on a little bit long there, but hopefully I've broken down the exam for you. You can go back and have a look at different sections again, and good luck with your study in the HSC, and hopefully there's been some good advice that you've received during the video. Good luck.